Were you were you able to speak with Rosenbaum? And was he, after you'd been shot, was he conscious and in terms of trying to give him any kind of medical help? What was that like? I know you said to someone call 911, but what happened after that? Like,
well, actually, so yesterday I went through this account, but basically we picked, somebody yelled, "There's a hospital." So I was trying to find the holes on his body. There were 4 shots that were fired. At the time, I couldn't tell if it was 3 or 4, but I knew at such a close range that he had been hit, that there had to be holes somewhere. So in the process of that, someone yelled, "There's a hospital right across the street." And me, having a brother who's in the medical, who's an ER doc, and a dad who was one, I was like, we're not going to do anything more productive than just what they could do in the hospital for him.
Right.
So at that point I said, hey, get under his other arm. And we carried him towards the hospital.
I should jump in here just for a second, just to point out that by this point, Richie had already taken his own shirt off and was using it to compress the head wound that they found on Rosenbaum. So he's holding his shirt to Rosenbaum's head. And that's when you guys start moving towards the hospital.
Yes. And which, as it turns out, was actually a graze wound. And there was actually a wound that went into the top of his back, as presumably as he was falling forward, that went down through, I think it went through his lungs and his liver. And then there was one in his pelvis. It's not clear which one killed him, but it was not actually the head wound. But as we're running across the street, someone said, "Hey, I work at the hospital. Put him in the back of this SUV. It'll be quicker." Pop the tailgate open. And one of the crazy things about that experience was, as I was loading him into the back of this SUV, there's a big mob. Everybody's very angry. There's just been a shooting. There were actually still literally shots going off up the street. I was getting bumped, and I had so much adrenaline, I didn't think anything of it. And then I felt like a fist just connect with the side of my face really hard. Like somebody just teed me up. And I turn, and I'm literally still holding on to Rosenbaum. I'm not getting back into the back of the vehicle with him cradled in my arms. And there's this guy pointing at me, and he's like, you can actually see him in Ford Fisher has a piece of video where he's at the tailgate. He kind of gets knocked by the crowd, and you can't quite see him hit me, but you can see him pointing at me and like kind of squaring up with me at the back of the vehicle. And I just gave like a younger brother a kick from the back of that SUV to get him away from me. And then we couldn't even get the tailgate down because there was such a mob behind the car. And so I just yelled to the hospital employee, just drive. We don't need the tailgate. We went down the ramp, and that was when I had a couple of minutes, because there was actually a gate that had to open up, where I was talking to Rosenbaum. And in that moment, his eyes were kind of rolling around the whole time. But in that moment, I was just telling him that we're going to have a beer and laugh about this one day. Everything's going to be okay. And I was just looking down at him, and I could see his eye kind of refocus on my eyes. And in that moment, my only goal was to give him some degree of peace, because if you've ever heard any of the audio from this, it's like, I guess one of his lungs was collapsed, filled with blood. You can hear him trying to breathe. It's extremely clear that he's, suffering immensely. And I just wanted to comfort him in any way that I could. So that was the best that I could come up with, was we're going to have a beer after this. But I do think that he was hearing me in that moment. And I know that so many people have given me their opinions about, I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of messages of, why would you help that, whatever his past was. He had certainly a checkered past. I don't care about any of that.
And how would you know?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's number one. Exactly. How would I know? Am I going to interview him about whether he's worthy of my attempt to save his life?
It's freaking unbelievable.
But number two, even knowing that in hindsight, I would not change a thing, because I don't care who you are. Everybody deserves dignity and death. And I think that that's the perfect example of how polarized this is people are wishing malice on what they presume to be the other side. And I'm caught in the middle, and all I can do is, and especially with the impending trial, I just had to take I just had to just read the message and just carry on. And unfortunately, I have a tendency to like read every Twitter comment of every single everything.
Don't do that,
And,
Richie.
I gotta
Just
stop.
a warning from Vince and me.
Yeah,
Don't
gotta
do
stop.
that.
Yes.
Don't read the comments.
And Jason's familiar with, obviously, dealing with, there were a lot of right wingers who came after me because of those efforts, because of the fact that I'm named as a victim in the case. So in spite of all that, it's just, you just got to forget about it, keep your head down, and just, I know what I saw, and I'm not going to change, anything to favor one side or the other, because it's the facts are what they are, and I'll let the courts decide from there.